In a moment, we're going to ask our studio audience if they'd like to ask you some questions, Dr. King. I'm sure they would. Let me ask you one, if I may. Your stand on the Vietnam War has certainly been a positive one, often misconstrued by many people. I've heard two accusations that you probably feel that because there are Negroes fighting in Vietnam for a foreign government, why should they be fighting there when they don't have rights in their own country? I know that's not true. And the other one, that you feel economically that the war hurts your cause because money is being spent in that war that could very easily be spent, what is it, $2 billion a month it's costing? Or could be spent here on poverty and housing for people. What is your reason for your stand on Vietnam?
Well, I would say there are several reasons, all growing out of one basic reason. And the one basic reason is that I feel that the war in Vietnam is clearly an unjust war. And I think there are many reasons why it is an unjust war. It is basically a civil war, and I can't see for the world of me why our nation is involved 8,000 miles away from home in what is basically a civil war. It puts us in the position of being against the self-determination of a people. And if we look back and go over the history and the development of the war in Vietnam, it is very clear that every move that we have made there is a move against the self-determination of the Vietnamese people. For instance, in 1945, after joint occupation of the French and Japanese, the Vietnamese people declared themselves independent. And incidentally, they quoted our own Declaration of Independence in their document of freedom, and yet our government refused to recognize them. And for 8 bloody years, the French sought to reconquer their former colony, and we supported the French to the tune of more than $3 billion. In fact, toward the end of that war, just before the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, we were meeting more than 80% of the war costs. Then came the Geneva Accord in 1954, but we helped install a man named Diem, who engaged in some of the most repressive and brutal methods toward his own people that we've seen anywhere in modern history. And he prevented the Vietnamese people from having the call for elections in 1956. And the Viet Cong, which we today call that communist force of aggression from the North, actually came into existence as a resistance movement in the South to the brutal dictatorial methods of Mr. Diem. And if we look at the history, we see this clear pattern of being against the self-determination of the Vietnamese people. But not only that, I think this war is playing havoc with our domestic destinies. It has been estimated that we spend about $500,000 to kill every enemy soldier, while we spend only about $53 a year for every person categorized as poverty-stricken. Now, this seems to me, and I'm sure to anybody else looking at it realistically, to be a tragic order in terms of priorities. And I cannot overlook the fact that the war in Vietnam can lead us to a nuclear holocaust. It can actually lead to the annihilation of the whole human race. The more this war is escalated, the more it moves toward bringing China into the war. And it can lead to a third world war which can destroy the whole of mankind. Now, as a Negro, I must be concerned also because Negroes are dying in disproportionate numbers in Vietnam. We are about 11% of the population here in America, and we are about 22 4/10% of the dying forces on the battlefields of Vietnam. Now, these things are just facts. How difficult they are to face, they are there. And this is why I feel that it is incumbent upon me, not only as a civil rights leader, but as a clergyman, as a humanitarian, and as one concerned about peace and brotherhood, and I would say something even beyond that, as one who loves America and who would like to see our nation stand as a moral example of the world. For all of these reasons, I am compelled to take a stand against this futile, bloody, and costly war in Vietnam.
Could we have the House lights, please? Do we have questions? Anybody downstairs?
King, as far as I know, the communists are the enemies of the United States as it stands now until we become communists. Now, North Vietnam, the North Vietnamese are communists and the North Koreans are communists. Now, I've heard it said that a person who refuses to answer the call of their country to fight, whether it's in Europe, in the First World War, Second World War, or in Korea, or in Vietnam, is committing an act of treason, and anyone who tells them not to serve for their country is also a traitor. Now, what would you say to that, sir?
Well, first let me deal with the communist problem. I think we've got to face the fact that communism is a fact in the world, that millions and millions of people live under communist regimes, and we've got to face the fact that communism is a rival political system. I think it is very unfortunate that we grew up in a generation, particularly during the McCarthy era, when we were almost forced to have a kind of morbid, almost paranoid attitude toward communism. And we failed to see it as a rival political system. We came to see it as a kind of monolithic bloc that was out to take over the whole world. Now, I think we've come to see, at least many people have come to see, that the things that we talked about a few years ago just aren't true. Communism hasn't proved to be this big monolithic bloc. Russian communism today is certainly different from classical communism, and we've seen changes within the communist system, and we've seen conflicts within communism itself. For instance, the conflict between Russia and China demonstrates that communism has variations. So that I think we've got to honestly face the fact that communism is a fact in the world, and we cannot continue to live with this kind of morbid fear of communism that characterized so many of the days ahead. Now, it so happens that communism is a system that I disagree with philosophically. I would not prefer to live under a communist system. I happen to feel that the great moments of history have been those moments when individuals have been left free to think and to act. And I feel that communism often stands in the way of certain First Amendment privileges that we have in America, for instance, that I just couldn't adjust to. But there are other people who are communists and they live in communist countries, and I think this is something that they have a right to do if they want to. The other thing that is necessary for everybody to see is that many of the revolutions in the world today are animated by nationalism and not by communism, and I think this is probably true of North Vietnam. The thing that moves them on, the thing that keeps the move in the third world toward independence is more a nationalistic surge than it is a communist surge. And when people talk about communist aggression in Vietnam, they fail to realize that there isn't a single troop in Vietnam from Russia. There isn't a single troop in Vietnam from China other than as advisors. Now, if this is an attempt of communism to take over, it seems to me that Russia and China would have a lot of troops there. We are the ones that have troops 8,000 miles away, wherein they have no troops in North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese don't have any particular love for China. They were once dominated by China. And I think we've got to see that the quest is a quest for independence, for self-determination. Now, on the question of being a traitor, it depends on what one means about this. The Selective Service Act of our country guarantees one the right to be a conscientious objector. And I'm sure that all people of moral concern would support one's right to live in line with his conscience. And if one is conscientiously opposed to war, then I think everybody, including the federal government, should support that right. And fortunately, through the Selective Service Act, this is a possibility. Now, the only problem is that the Selective Service Act, as it is presently structured, only makes it possible for one to be conscientiously opposed to all wars. That is, one has to be a pacifist rather than be opposed to a particular war. And I think that part of the Selective Service Act should be revised so that one can be conscientiously opposed to a particular war. And I don't think that person is a traitor. It may well be that a person is doing this because of a deep love for his country, because of a higher patriotism, and because of a desire to see his country move down the right path of justice and to see his country be on the right side of a world revolution.
We'll be right back.